We have Chapter 7:1, African Beginnings. African beginnings began with hunting and gathering. So if we look at our main headings, we have changing survival skills. So we know that over time, the African civilization or African societies changed how they lived day to day. And so the initial people lived by hunting and gathering. So a hunter and gatherer is someone who hunts animals and gathers food in the wild to survive. Hunters and gatherers used animal hides to provide protection from weather. Keep in mind your basic needs are food, clothing, and shelter. So here you have food. Animal hides would provide clothing and shelter. And these are people that made tools out of wood, animal bones, and then eventually stone. And that shift to using stone for tools began the Stone Age. And these different ages throughout history are marked by some revolution in technology. And so, like today, we say we're in the information age because of the internet, because of our computing skills, because the way that that type of technology has really blossomed. We can send information all over the world almost immediately. At this point, shifting to making stone tools was a huge change in technology. It was an advanced way of doing something. Some of the first evidence of human life is in the Great Rift Valley in East Africa. So if we switch and we look at Google Earth, so here's our world. The Great Rift Valley is here in Eastern Africa, and the easiest way to find it is to look for the lakes. So Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Malawi. Right in through here is the Rift Valley. And so the first hunters and gatherers lived in this area. They had easy access to water, they had favorable climate, so their need for shelter wasn't that great. Ample food as far as hunting and gathering goes. What happens then is a shift from hunting and gathering to farming and herding. So sometime between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, some hunters and gatherers began to farm and herd animals. And at first this happened in protected areas where grains such as barley grew best, but eventually they learned to save their seeds and plant them. So historians think at first it was kind of an accidental discovery. Hey, we threw away these seeds here last year and now we have this fruit here or we have these plants here. So they learned how to save those seeds, they learned how to plant them, and that's called domestication. Domestication, to domesticate is to adapt a plant and animal for human use. So animals like cows are domesticated, horses are domesticated, um, sheep, goats, pigs are all domesticated. We are able to raise them for our own use. The early settlements, so farming and herding enabled them to build settlements. And so the early settlements, domestication means that people had better control over food supply. They no longer had to hunt and gather, but they could settle in one place. Typically, in the earliest times, those were near water, and they were able to produce a food surplus. A food surplus is a really important concept because once you have a food surplus, you have extra food, not everybody has to be a farmer, and you can have a division of labor. When you can have a division of labor, you can have people who are rulers, people who are merchants, people who are traders, people who have skills, people who are farmers, people who are laborers. And so instead of everyone being a farmer, you have more of a variation in society. So having these year-round settlements was the first step to the development of civilizations. So if you look back, your main headings, changing for survival skills, you go from hunting and gathering to farming and herding, which then makes the earliest settlements possible, and then eventually you're going to have civilizations. Okay, the next concept is that of culture hearth. A culture hearth is a place where ancient civilizations form. There are four main culture hearths around 2000 BC. So you have the one that we're going to look at along the Nile River. So we look right here. The Nile River starts in East Africa at Lake Victoria, comes up through here. Another branch starts in Ethiopia and joins here near Khartoum in Sudan. And then once you get to the desert, the Nile River is very easy to track. All the way up here through Egypt. This is the delta, and this is the best picture of a delta. So the delta is the place where the river empties into the ocean, and it's an area of low-lying land. So as this large river, this major river comes, it kind of just spills and it waters all of this land. And so what you have is you have a whole network of little rivers that form that empty. And all of this is great farmland. And this is why Egypt was able to become such a wonderful civilization, because they were able, even in the desert, to grow food here in the Delta. So that's one culture hearth. Another culture hearth is Pakistan. So that was along the Indus River Valley. So we come over here to where India is. Right through here where you see this river valley. Pakistan's pretty dry. And so where the Indus River is, in this valley, they were able to farm. So that's another culture hearth. Another one is ancient China, and then also Mesopotamia. So we look at Mesopotamia first because, whoops, we're in the neighborhood. Mesopotamia was in this area of Iraq. And so there are two rivers here. There's the Tigris River and the Euphrates River that are very close together. And then they actually join kind of like a Y and come out here through Kuwait. But this area was where Mesopotamia was also called the Fertile Crescent. And this was an area of great civilization. And then the last culture hearth is in the Wanhe River Valley. This was in East Asia. It was down in the southern part of China. So a culture hearth is a place where the first civilizations grew up. So it's not that these were the only people living in the world, but these were the most major civilizations. So you have the Nile River Valley, you have Mesopotamia, you have the Indus River Valley, and the Wanhe River Valley. And what you should notice is this one, this one, this one, this one. They're mostly at the same latitude. So they're at a place where they have warm weather year-round. They were located near water. They had a favorable climate. So civilizations on the Nile. Civilization is a society with cities, a government, and social classes. Usually also has religion. Technology is really important here, and a writing system. And again, technology is an advanced way of doing something, so it doesn't mean smartphones and computers. Civilizations also would have social classes. A social class is a group that is made up of people with similar backgrounds, wealth, and ways of living. So when you have a surplus of food and you have a division of labor where different people do different jobs, that ends up arranging people into social classes. So these groups that is made up of people with similar backgrounds. Social classes form when people do different jobs that create different levels of income. Civilizations also usually include architecture, writing, and art. So certainly if we think about what we know of Egypt in this light, they have the pyramids, they had the hieroglyphics, they had great art within these temples, whether it was sculpture or the drawings on the walls or just even the pyramids themselves. Egypt was possible because the Nile River flooded its banks every summer, and the waters would cover the ground and they would lay a layer of fertile silt. Silt is very, very fine earth carried by the rivers. And around 5000 BC, people began farming along the banks of the Nile River. Ancient Egypt was ruled by kings and queens called pharaohs, whom the people believed were actually gods. They had some interesting beliefs about the gods and goddesses, and they believed that the pharaoh was the god on earth. When they died, this is why they were buried in large tombs. Some of them were built as pyramids. Within those tombs, you would have hieroglyphics, which are picture writings on the inside of the tombs. And ancient Egyptians became skilled in papermaking, medicine, and astronomy. Some of the largest pyramids are located here, just near Cairo. So this is here in Egypt. And if we zoom in, we should be able to find some. I'll just type in. So if I type in the Great Pyramid, the pyramids at Giza are just a little bit to the west. And so if you zoom in, the Great Pyramid at Giza and the Giza Necropolis, we should be able to actually see them. So the right here. So here's the top of the pyramid. Here's all the way around. Here's the second pyramid. And here's the third, smaller pyramid. And of course, Google Earth has all kinds of pictures that people have taken. That doesn't seem like it should belong there. There's another one. Oh, the camels. So camels sitting at the base of the Pyramid of Giza. So that's how it looks. Stone, different tunnels. And so the way that they were buried is these were on top of it, and there were all kinds of secret passageways and tunnels underneath that held the different tombs and the different tomb rooms. And these are places where people still come visit today. Nubia was another civilization, and it was a great civilization. It was to the south of Egypt. So when we talk about ancient Egypt, we really are talking about the area that was in the delta. So this area was Egypt. Nubia was down here. So Nubia was south of Egypt. And these communities began farming. They formed kingdoms around 3100 BC. The greatest of the Nubian kingdoms was at a city called Napata. Nubians conquered Egypt around 724 BC, and they ruled for about 60 years. A later Nubian kingdom was farther south at Meroe, conquered about 350 AD by Ethiopian forces from the kingdom of Aksum, which was farther east in Egypt. So essentially what's important to understand about that is Egypt was not the only kingdom, was not the only civilization. Nubia was smaller, it's not as well known, it's not as well remembered, but they were eventually able to take over Egypt. The last section here is the Bantu migrations. This is something we've talked about already in class. So the Bantu migrations mean to migrate, to move from one place and settle in another. We're not really sure why they migrated. We just know that they did migrate. So early migrations often had to do with the ability to grow crops or overpopulation in a certain area. We know that they moved from North Central Africa to Southern Africa. So spreading their language, as they spread their language southward, their language becomes dominant. Language and ethnic groups. Ethnic groups are groups that share languages, religions, family ties, and customs. And people in an ethnic group share an identity that is separate from other groups. It's often based on history or culture. It's not simply based on race. Sometimes it's based on a distinct language. So for example, most of the people in Central and Southern Africa today speak a Bantu-based language such as Zulu, Xhosa, Shona, Swahili. Swahili is a language that encompasses many different ethnicities, but Zulu, Xhosa, those are both ethnicities and languages in Southern Africa. Shona is a language and it's an ethnicity in Zimbabwe. We can look at some of these when we have class.